Hey everybody, this is Mike with BuzzTox, and today we are talking about In the Weeks Ahead trailer, which occurred at the end of episode 1 of HBO's Watchmen. There's going to be spoilers here, so if you haven't seen it, go ahead and watch episode 1. At the end of episode 1, we see Angela approaching Will Reeves, who sits with the recently killed chief. The trailer shows us that Angela will question Reeves about the death of the chief, and we find out that Will Reeves is over 100 years old and was the boy from the opening sequence of the first episode. I'm wondering if he has some sort of power which is connected with Dr. Manhattan, which has allowed his old age and has given him some sort of precognitive powers. Reeves warns Angela of a vast conspiracy, perhaps the one which was carried out by the heroes at the end of the comic in 1985, when Adrian Veidt carried out a squid attack on New York and tricked the world into believing it was aliens, and in the process he ended the Cold War and saved humanity. Perhaps there's also a new conspiracy involving players we haven't seen yet. Later on, we see Angela lecturing her son about the duality of the world into good and evil, black and white, and in between them sits a model of Dr. Manhattan's Martian home, which we saw him destroying in episode 1. Later on, we see her trying on a pair of Night Owl goggles. We already saw Night Owl's ship Archie in the first episode, so perhaps Night Owl tech is out there in the world, or perhaps the Chief is going to turn out to be Night Owl from the original comics. We then switch to the Tulsa police force, who are going to do mass arrests following the death of the Chief at the Nixonville trailer park, likely invoking Article 4 in fear of their own safety. And with this Article 4, we can see that the police are going to see a complete disregard for citizens' rights in the forms of enhanced interrogations and continued brutality, like we saw in episode 1. And although Angela states earlier that in a very Rorschach fashion of there only being right and wrong, good and evil, the actions of the police are going to show us that there are many shades of gray which we're going to see throughout the show. We'll be introduced to FBI agent Laurie Blake, who's brought in to investigate the death of the chief and the continued hunt for the 7th Cavalry. In the Watchmen comic, Laurie was the second Silk Spectre. She was the daughter of the original Silk Spectre, and the comics revealed that Laurie's father was actually the anti-hero, the comedian Eddie Blake, and she takes on his name during this show. Later in the trailer, we see Laurie perhaps undercover robbing a bank with 2 white males, perhaps Rorschach members, which she's infiltrated, and this is interrupted by a masked adventurer. We all know that her feelings about adventurers from the previous trailers, she doesn't think they should be there, and in the comics, she's sick of being a superhero herself. We see Senator Keene, the presumed son of John Keene, who in the comics brought in the Keene Act, banning masked vigilantes in the 1970s. Keene is shown attempting to manipulate Looking Glass by turning him against a female. It's unclear whether it's Agent Blake or whether it's Angela who he's talking about in this scene. Later we see Looking Glass infiltrating the church, which is shown in the propaganda video of the 7th Cavalry during episode 1. From previous trailers, we know that in the same scene, Looking Glass may have an interaction with Dr. Manhattan, as we see his blue transparent transportation powers being used, where he drops something behind Looking Glass, maybe to misdirect him or to save him in some fashion. We see Adrian Veidt now meditating, which is referencing a famous cover of the Before Watchmen series. He has this wonderful smile in this scene as if he's got the answers to a question, and perhaps it's the final piece of his plan for humanity. We know from his dialogue in the trailer that once again, he believes that mankind is on the brink of annihilation, but don't worry, he has a plan. He's shown drawing designs and assembling some sort of apparatus with the help of his servants, all of them possible androids, but what is this thing that he's making? The apparatus must somehow be able to counter the abilities of Dr. Manhattan, who can basically do anything and is able to see through his own timeline, essentially existing at every moment of his life at once. We see Adrian entering a chamber and also setting off a detonator of some sort. Perhaps this will destroy his English estate in the same way we saw Dr. Manhattan destroy the estate's replica on Mars in the first episode. We know that the two are linked, and they're both the supreme watchmen of the series. They operate on higher levels than what's going on in Tulsa. and they once again are making their own plans for what they believe will save humanity. But what his plan is a mystery so far. Later images in the trailer show him in what looks like a prison cell, one in which he's sat for a long time. He's blowing out another candle, like in the first episode, only now there's 6 candles, indicating it's been 6 years since the imagery in episode 1. And as the cake is the same as the one made for him by his servants in episode 1, it seems that he's somehow the captive of those servants. But Adrian Veidt is supposed to be the master manipulator. He's the smartest man on Earth who sees every angle of every situation. And he couldn't be imprisoned without his consent as a part of his greater plan. But what is this big threat that Adrian is going to such lengths to counter? It's not going to be the schemes of the Rorschach cults, because they're operating on a small scale compared to the threat of nuclear annihilation, which forced Adrian to act in 1985 in the comics. There's this introduction of a woman with a strange outfit and the Spock hairdo, and she's known as Lady Trio. This name comes from a 3rd century Vietnamese warrior who began a revolt resisting an attempted Chinese occupation of Vietnam. Angelo and Laurie meet our Lady Trio in a domed tower complex, which reminded me of Adrian Veidt's Antarctic base from the comics. Unlike Veidt's tower, this one has a squid and a Dr. Manhattan symbol at its peak. The same symbol we see spray painted on the wall while Laurie is apparently being held captive. And once again, we see it spray painted on a 7th Cavalry church. Lady Trio states that, like Adrian, she too has a plan for humanity, and she seems to be the leader of this, a corporation, a religious movement surrounding the events of 1985 and Dr. Manhattan's self-imposed exile to Mars. They're stockpiling supplies and preparing. Perhaps they're another doomsday cult who will instigate an Armageddon scenario, forcing Adrian to carry out his plan. Or perhaps they're just another tool being funded and used by Adrian to further his plan. Other events we can see are a mass causality incident at a fair which seemingly caused instant death to hundreds. And we also see this courtroom scene, perhaps the play mentioned by Adrian in the first episode involving his servants and a bunch of pigs set loose. And part of me thinks this is just the result of bad programming by Adrian of his androids, but we'll have to see. There's a ton happening in the show so far, a lot of questions that have left that we don't know the answers to yet, and we've just got theories so far. If you've got some of your own, please comment below, let us know. Thanks, and keep watching The Watchmen.